Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. It's Wednesday, December 7th. I am Shaka Ssali. Today, we'll talk about how to defeat dictators and fight tyranny in Africa. It has been a year of significant political change on the continent, notably so in Zambia, where Rupiah Banda conceded a defeat in the peaceful elections last September, bringing in Michael Sata as the nation's new president. And there have been remarkable changes in North Africa, where three of the world's most entrenched leaders are now gone. Changes there, once thought impossible, have eluded most of sub-Saharan Africa, where many of the world's longest-standing leaders remain in power. My colleague Paul Sisco has more on this story.
Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, gone after 42 years in power. Egypt's Hosni Mubarak, also gone, removed in a popular uprising after some 30 years of rule. And it all began with the departure of President Zayn El Abidine Ben Ali, who ruled Tunisia for 23 years until 11 months ago. But why them and not, say, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo of Equatorial Guinea, who toppled his uncle in a palace coup in 1979 and still reigns? Or Jussa Eduardo dos Santos, who assumed the presidency of oil-rich Angola in the same year? Or 87-year-old Robert Mugabe, who has led Zimbabwe first as a prime minister and now as president for more than 3 decades? These are questions posed and discussed by noted economist and award-winning author Professor George Ayittey in his recently published book, Defeating Dictators, Fighting Tyranny in Africa and Around the World.
These guys are impervious to reason. All that they understand is power.
Dictators sustain power, he says, because the opposition is often weak and divided.
For example, when Belarus held an election, there were 9 opposition parties trying to challenge Lukashenko. In Ethiopia, in May 2010 presidential elections, there were 92 opposition groups or parties. In Cameroon, they just had an election, October 9th. And there were over 200 opposition parties. I mean, when you have this many opposition parties, there's no way. It takes, one of the things which we must remember is a cardinal principle. It takes a coalition of opposition groups, opposition parties to defeat a dictator. One person alone, one party alone cannot do it. It takes a coalition.
Ayittey is a great believer in Africa's youth and writes that in order for the West to facilitate Africa's quest for greater freedoms, its strategies must include smarter economic sanctions and more generous fellowships for African students. Ayittey is an advisor to the Obama administration. He says dictators maintain their power by controlling 6 basic institutions.
If you wrestle control of the media out of the hands of the dictators, then, you can get your message across.
The media, he says, is the first institution dictators want to control.
Second, they take over the security forces. And then they take over parliament, they take over the electoral commission, and then they also take over the civil service and the banking system. So if you want to wrestle, defeat dictators, you have to wrestle at least one or more of these institutions out of their grip.
In Zambia this year, President Rupiah Banda conceded defeat in a free and fair election that brought President Michael Sata to power. The victory by Sata and his Patriotic Front ended 2 decades of rule by the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, which came to power in the country's first multi-party elections in 1991. But at least 13 sitting African leaders have dominated and continue to govern their struggling nations for more than 2 decades. Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, in power since 1989, is wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. King Shawati II of Swaziland, Sub-Saharan's last absolute monarch, was crowned in 1987. Cameroon's Paul Biya took power in 1982, and Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, who declared himself president in 1986, won a disputed 4th term in office this year. Paul Sisco, VOA News.